Good morning and welcome to Travels with Monkey Boy. Today we are on day 8 of our journey to Scotland, April 2nd, 1999. This time the ferry ride was uneventful. Jilreen and Frankie took Dramamine first thing in the morning and were blissfully sleeping the whole trip. I had my camera ready this time, but this morning the old man of Hoy was hidden by fog. We could glimpse it, but not nearly matching the sartorial splendor of the trip before. As we were getting off the ferry, I said the first thing we had to do was to go to the bank. We were down to our last £5, and though the banks would be open today, Friday morning, they would be closed all weekend. We didn't need to change a lot of money since we were leaving on Sunday, but food and gas made some cash essential. When suddenly Jolene said, "Isn't it Good Friday today?" Oh my God, it was. And it was a bank holiday. So one final time our trip looked doomed when we hit upon the idea of trying to get a credit card advance at one of the automated tellers. Let me just say that we live in an unbelievable world. In Thurso, Scotland, a town of not more than 2,000 people on the extreme northern coast of Britain and a full 5,000 miles away from our credit card issuing bank, we put a piece of plastic in a machine and it spit out $200 and we were set. Today's plan was to drive the full length of the northernmost coast of Scotland. It was a beautiful drive, and the northern coast was much more ruggedly beautiful than the eastern coast. After about an hour, we stopped near Tongue for lunch. There was only one place for lunch, and it was a hotel, but the food was good and the view outside was gorgeous. A further hour along the coast, we came to a city called Durness. There was a famous cave here that you could see behind me that we decided to visit. It was not a typical limestone cave like we were used to in the States, but an old sea cave created during the last ice age. The entrance was impressive at its height, and the cave was unimpressive in its depth, but it was deep enough that the cave director, a young hippie sort with his dog, took us on a boat ride into the cave. I mean, it was a 3-minute boat ride, and because it wasn't limestone, there were no impressive stalactites, but still, cave is a cave. And it did feel kind of cool to be in a boat on a river inside a cave. And we were not alone. There was a camera crew from the BBC along with us. I mean, they weren't a camera crew. They were camera crew sans camera. There was some BBC story in the area. BBC is getting wackier in their search for ratings, and we're doing some sort of search and rescue thing. But the male and female crew had an afternoon to kill, so they too wanted to see the famous cave. It's not the sort of thing that makes a trip, but it was a nice little side trip for an hour. After Durness, we turned south to drive along the extreme western shore of the Highlands. Actually, the original road from Durness took us through the country. This was a nice change of pace from the constant ocean view we had the last 5 or 6 days. Suddenly, on the side of the road, we glimpsed a mighty antlered stag off on the other side of a bog. Now, up on the road from Durness to Lexford Bridge in the Highlands of northwest Scotland during the low tourist season, there was no one on the roads. So we pulled to the side, and Frankie and Alex and the camera and I went on a stag hunt. We got right to the edge of the bog and kind of hopped in a little. We saw one, then a second, then a third of these beautiful, majestic animals. I'm not sure that they were any bigger than a good-sized domestic whitetail buck, but they looked bigger. And they certainly weren't too nervous with us being around, so we shot them and moved on. Further on this part, I saw my first farm with Highland cows. This is another extraordinary animal. Long, shaggy fur on their bodies, impressive long horns, and a little tuft of hair between their horns that gave them a kind of Beatles look. Really quite a pretty animal and an odd looking for a cow. At Laxford Bridge, I made an unannounced and foolish decision. See, there were two roads from here, the normal tourist road and the extreme and magnificently beautiful mega tourist road. They call the road Fire Alley or something like that because the roads are so steep that many tourists during the summer months burn out their brake linings driving it. To me, that was like throwing down the gauntlet. And besides, it was only 3 p.m. We were getting close to our hotel. And how long could this little 10-mile detour take us? Well, this road was nuts. One lane, and I think more correctly, 3/4 of a lane. And you would go down like 70-degree inclines. and there was a 2,000-foot drop off on either side of you. Then, about every 10 minutes, we would meet a car going the other way. Now, why there were no cars that passed us in either direction for the last 2 hours, but there were 20 of them on this killer road remains a mystery. And one or the other of the drivers would have to back up this 70-degree incline on 3/4 of a lane of road until it widened into 1.5 lanes and we could both pass. Sure, the scenery was beautiful, but who could look? All right, we all looked. I mean, the West Coast was the most spectacular. The wind and the waves here have nothing to slow them down before they smack into the land. So the cliffs were much more beaten and twisted. And there were trees here. Okay, not a lot of trees, but we particularly noticed them because while we were passing a house, we noticed their pine tree was burning. At first, we thought it was a forced burning, but about 3 miles up the road, a man flagged us over and told us to drive to the next town and find someone with a phone and have them call the fire department. Remember, this is in the age long before people had cell phones. The old McGregor place was empty right now, but the tree would soon have it burned to the ground if no help came. So we drove and we drove and we drove for about 20 minutes before we found something that resembled a town. Jilreen dutifully ran to a homeowner and told him the trouble, and we rolled on fully aware that by the time a fire truck got up that road, the whole Highlands would be in flames. So not to want to be too close to an inferno, we drove on. This stupid drive of 10 miles took us at least an hour. It left us with at least an hour to go along the normal scenic road, and it left the troops in near revolt. But oh, the sights we saw. That night we pulled into Lochinver, a small port town on the west coast, right before the sunset. The hotel was substandard, but it's not like we were going to be spending time there. We dumped our suitcases in the room, and I said it was time for us to go exploring. We walked along the city path. There was a river that split the city in two, and we decided to take a side street following the river up a hill. We were rewarded with the sight of an old mill at the base of a waterfall. It all felt so tranquil. Then we walked back down to the main street and found a park. The kids went crazy running around in all the equipment, and Jilreen and I sat on a bench overlooking the kids, swinging, overlooking a beautiful little bay, overlooking the mountains to the north and south, and further out west, the rugged Atlantic. Felt very nice. By the time it had gotten quite dark, so we went further into town and ate at a very nice little restaurant. By the time we walked back to the hotel, it was quite late and we all went to bed because tomorrow was a big day. Okay, that's the story for today. Let me show you the map because we did a bunch of running around. Okay, if you remember, we started up here in Hillswick, drove down to Sunburg, took the flight from Sunburg down to Kirkwell. And this day we went from the port here to Thurso. Then we drove to the Smoo Cave. Went from Smoo Cave down to Lexford Bridge. From Lexford Bridge, we stopped at Lochinver. And that was the day. So hope you enjoyed riding along today, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.